Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today on 20 Sides Every Story. We've got a Talking 20 happening this Saturday morning, and today I am talking with our very own David Williams, who's played in a few of the campaigns here on the channel. And he is here because he has self-published a D&D adventure called, see if I can get it in the frame here, The Curse of Ermagerd. It is an adventure module that is based on characters from his young adult book, The Lost Tale of Sir Larpsalot. David also has some experience in tabletop role playing games, the publishing world of that, through some freelance work that you've been doing with Goodman Games, including a few of the projects you probably heard about, doing some editing and writing work on Dungeon Denizens and the upcoming Grimtooth's Old School Traps. I think is slated for Kickstarter sometime maybe later this year yet.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So so welcome, David.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Alex. Good morning, chat.
Thanks for coming by to just share a little bit about your experience and kind of the experience of writing for tabletop games. And maybe you'll share with us a little bit about how that's different than what you've are probably I would say more familiar with kind of literary writing.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about your kind of your background and how did you come to get into writing?
Sure. Yeah, I think it was somewhat accidental or incidental. I think I've always been something of a storyteller. The medium, has changed over time. There was a period where I thought maybe I'd be an illustrator. I just really liked coming up with characters and conflict and relationships, and I always had the ideas. And I wasn't really a big reader, so it wasn't necessarily on my radar. Then sophomore year of high school, I wandered to the back of Walden Books where the fantasy books were, and I knew I loved the genre because I'd played, Nintendo video games and television. I realized later that I was kind of a fan of fantasy without realizing it. Grabbed a Dragonlance book and immediately got hooked. And then over time, all that world building I was already kind of doing in my head, I was, writing notes and ideas, and it just sort of became natural that, well, this is how I can best and most efficiently record my ideas and start building on that. And then, you do enough of those writing exercises and scene writing, and you get to the point where you're like, well, if I ever want anyone else to read this, I kind of have to put it in a more traditional format of chapters and an actual story between two covers. So that would have been probably freshman year of college. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. I think writing is for me. I thought I had like really good ideas and I just needed to work on the writing, and then over time, the two kind of fight each other, or you're like, okay, well now I'm really kind of feeling I got the craft, but maybe I need to push myself more on the ideas. So, yeah, it sort of just then became something I knew I was going to do because I really enjoyed reading it, and I thought, yeah, I could probably do this. I can, I can give this a shot, and kind of never stopped after that.
How young were you when you published your first novel?
So I had kind of a back catalog going because I was trying to find an agent, and I had an agent, and I got really far with a couple major publishers over the years. So I probably had five complete manuscripts done by the time I put out my first book, and that would have been, oh, what was that now? Maybe 2007,
Okay.
or 2017. I should know this better. You know what I can do
There
is
was
I
a
can actually.
7 involved. It started
There
with
was.
2000.
Um, 2016 is when then I decided, you know what? Even as I'm waiting for the editor at Tor to get back to my agent to get back to me, I'm going to self-publish my first trilogy, because then if my second one, the Soul Sleep Cycle, doesn't get picked up eventually, like I'll just at least have kind of gotten my feet wet, know what I know, see if it's worth doing for my next series. So that, yeah. So I'm probably unique in that, for a self-published author, like I didn't really necessarily jump into it, as early. I kind of dragged my feet and really kind of was looking for maybe a different route to go. And I think now the stigma has kind of worn off to a large degree. It's just a very viable path. It's a DIY world we live in, so I think a lot of people now are just like, yeah, they'll probably still maybe look for an agent or an editor, but it's not so much plan D. It's like, yeah, if that doesn't work, then I'm just gonna put it out there. And I think I'm glad that I dragged my feet, because if I had put out my original trilogy when it was done, instead of putting like, almost a decade of time of just letting it sit and then coming back and ruthlessly slashing at it, I would not be as proud of, the end product. It was pretty bloated. I didn't really give the reader a lot of credit. The more you write, the more you learn. So
So some of your early experiences were more kind of, would you say traditional fantasy or sword and sorcery or high fantasy?
yeah,
Like, how would you define some of that
yeah.
style?
I usually say, it's sword and sorcery. It's somewhat epic. I don't know. You get words like high fantasy. I don't know that I would go to that extent. It was really much, I was inspired by that shared world fiction TSR was pumping out, the Dragonlance, the Forgotten Realms, the Ravenloft. I read a lot of those and just really enjoyed those adventure stories, and they are varying degrees of complexity, and they really inspired my world building, and therefore that was kind of my mentality. I was also an English major, so I tried to, keep things a little bit more literary. I tried to stretch certain things in the genre. Didn't always try to go the most predictable path. Um, but yeah, definitely the Renegade Chronicles is very in genre sword and sorcery fantasy.
So then, at some point, you decided to challenge yourself. I'm putting that out there. I would imagine it would have been a challenge to divert into kind of the young adult fantasy genre with the Lost Tale of Sir Larpsalot. Um, can you tell us a little bit about like what is the origin story of that? Like, what is the inspiration and like what is the why of getting into young adult literature?
Sure. Sure. So I wrote my first YA novel, Magic's Daughter, somewhat by accident. It's kind of a prequel almost to the Renegade Chronicles. It's the same world, but again, I've been writing these adventure stories and thought, well, what if I tried to write something that has a smaller cast, focused on, a main protagonist. She starts out at age 14, so it is kind of a coming of age. And then only after the fact, when I was done and kind of ready to put it out there, I'm like, well, I guess this is kind of YA. It checks a lot of the boxes. So that one was kind of YA by accident. And then when it came to The Lost Tale of Sir Larpsalot, several things kind of came together to inspire me to go with a more intentional YA novel. Um, and a big part of that was the Soul Sleep Cycle, my second trilogy, gets really deep and metaphysical and complex. It defies linear storytelling. It was a real challenge to write, and it took me quite a few years to finish the series. So I needed something a little bit shorter, lighter, self-contained. I was ready for a palate cleanser. And I had already had the idea for the Sir Larpsalot story. It originally was going to be a one-shot comic book. I was going to put together with several colleagues, a really talented illustrator I knew, and the project just kind of fizzled out. So that among several other ideas just kind of didn't go anywhere. But then when I was kind of reviewing, well, what do I really want to do? What excited me? And I realized that I really kind of liked the idea of that story and the character, and then instead of just focusing on one character, it became more of an ensemble. More than just Sir Larpsalot gets pulled into a fantasy world. It's him and his friends all go. And I realized that it would very easily translate in from a graphic novel to a YA novel. So it was kind of convenient. And then finally, I was at a point where I thought, my son, who was 14 years old at the time, really wasn't a big reader, kind of like me at that age. But he would occasionally get into a series or a book or something, and I was trying to see, well, what is it that like he enjoys? And it's the action packed, and it's the fast pace, and it's funny. Like humor was, I noticed something that was important to him as a reader, so I thought, this would be a fun one to use him as my beta reader, kind of, and I end up like dedicating it to him as well. So all those things kind of came together, and it was like this could just be a really fun project, and I ran with it.
That's very cool. It's very cool when it's like personal like that. There's that family aspect, to your creative work. Like you can't really
Yeah.
separate real life from your writing. Like it informs it,
Yeah.
and so that's
It,
like,
yeah,
well,
it was fun because there would be these Tuesdays where I'd work out a couple of chapters, and then he and his sister would come home from school, and I'd just read them to them and get their immediate feedback. And they were not shy about saying like, I didn't understand that, or like, what does that word mean, or oh, I really liked this part. And yeah, so it's you don't often as a writer get that sort of immediate feedback and almost like that level of collaboration unless you're co-writing something or working, with an illustrator and such. So
I'm
yeah,
sure they don't hold
a lot
back,
of
right? Like they give it to you
no, they don't.
brutally
They're
honest.
not super impressed with me. There's no mystery behind what I do. It's like, well, why don't you say this? Or yeah.
Well, and I suppose, as a writer, that's like kind of what you want. You'd rather
Yeah.
people that you appreciate like telling you these things rather than random people on the internet or
Right.
whatever. Um,
Yeah.
so not that you don't get that, I'm sure too. That's probably a whole other
I feel
topic
like
having to deal with that.
yeah, I feel like you like having a fairly thick skin is a necessity if you're gonna be any sort of creative who's putting their work out there. So yeah, I I I never shy away. I'd rather people give me constructive criticism than just blanket praise. Like that doesn't help me improve.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about maybe the synopsis of like the story of Sir Larpsalot, because that'll feed into kind of some of conversation about the role playing game module that you put together. Um, and
So
yeah, maybe you could even tell us a little bit about some of those characters that we're gonna see.
yeah. So the synopsis is fairly straightforward. You have five teenage LARPers. They get pulled into a fantasy world and must become the characters they pretend to be to get back home. So essentially, there's a spellcaster who pulls them into their world to be the heroes that world needs, not realizing they're just faking it, and now they actually have to fake it to make it. And so yeah, you'll get Lorenzo, who is the real world Sir Larpsalot, and he is kind of the party leader. He's a paragon. So all of these are sort of they're versions of D&D, but not really because it's LARPing. So there's some parallels there. Asher plays Elvish Presley. He's also the GM and kind of primary world builder. He kind of chimes in throughout the Curse of Ermagerd, providing tips and context. You have Mac, Michaela. She's plays Brutus the Bullheaded, a Minotaur berserker. Um, John plays Master Prospero. He's kind of probably the rules lawyer, the know-it-all of the group. And his little brother Trent, who plays Tomfoolery, who kind of screws around and steals stuff from the party when they're not looking. And yeah, they're the quote unquote heroes. Um, and their adversary, kind of throughout most of the book, is the mysterious Wizard Hawk. So Wizard Hawk is kind of who they're hunting and who they have to slay in order to get sent back home. And really, those are the player characters in the Curse of Ermagerd. So instead of Lorenzo being Sir Larpsalot, you can be Sir Larpsalot or Lady Larpsalot, whichever you prefer. Or you can be Elvish Presley. And I did add a sixth member of Good Company, just I don't know, more options or just give myself more work. I sort of invented this, cousin of Lorenzo's who's kind of goth who comes over and decides to LARP with them one day and becomes Lord Grimdark. So he's an edge lord and kind of like Lorenzo's, the Paragon's opposite in many ways. So yeah, those are kind of the characters and uh, yeah, I after writing Sir Larps a lot, where they get they play these characters, but they get pulled into a different world, and you get references all throughout about the game they play and who their characters are and some of the monsters they fight. I realized that like, man, I really wish I could have spent more time in their fake world, and the Curse of Ermagerd really let me do that, kind of build out this world that allegedly Asher created and now was working with me to put this book out. So kind of layers of fiction there. Gets a
Yeah,
little meta.
awesome. Well, we got a few questions from the chat. We'll start working through. Gabe wants to know, is Lorenzo Italian?
No, Lorenzo's Hispanic. He's of Mexican descent. Yeah.
And Lyra says Max swearing backwards is clever. And then she asks, "How did you get from the Larpsalot novel to the tabletop role playing game?"
Yeah. So as you mentioned on the intro, I've been doing more and more, freelance work with Goodman Games, starting out with editing, but also some writing. I was doing more homebrew adventures for my friends and family. And was really kind of enjoying it. It was, again, different. You're stretching different muscles. Um, and I even teased the idea of like, oh, I'm going to put the Renegade Chronicles out there as a TTRPG, and I put a April Fool's blog post, which actually kind of disappointed some people because they're like, oh, I would have loved to play in that world, but so I guess it was already maybe kind of in the back of my mind. Um, and then as I mentioned, like I had so many cool ideas and just this silly, silly version of an RPG that gets sprinkled throughout the novel. I'm like, this is really a cool opportunity to like really immerse myself in Mezzo Earth, this almost parody fantasy world. And I always, writing for a video game has been on my bucket list, so I really have been interested in interactive fiction, and this was really a nice entry point because you don't have to be a coder. And so it just felt like, this might be something I'm going to try. And this would be a perfect setting to do it because it's intrinsically silly, it's fun forward. I'm not really reinventing D&D. I'm not pushing the mechanics. I'm actually doing the opposite. I wanted this to be an accessible game for first-time players, young players, like teenagers, or maybe someone who's never DM before and is intimidated by it. I really gave myself permission to scale back, focus on the fun, and just surrender to the rule of cool, basically. So it was. I did it because it was fun. I did it because it really was. This is going to be hard. This isn't something I've ever put out a full publication, a full campaign. I haven't published really any campaigns at that point, so it was really just giving myself permission to like just just go with it, just run with it and have fun.
Yeah, so like I think you kind of said there, this is new medium for you, a new way of thinking about writing. I feel like tabletop role playing game like writing is so different because you have to wear kind of a lot of different hats or wear a lot of different kind of spectacles. It's like kind of part technical writing. There's like the storytelling stuff, that was probably your comfort zone, but then there's like these other things that kind of surround that all need a little bit of attention. Can you talk a little bit about that process of like how did you go about learning that? How did you go about trying to take what you had already created and then like kind of pull it apart almost to like give it, you know, for example, like taking Sir Larpslot. How did you peel that back and think of him as a D&D archetype that then you kind of put together?
Hmm. Sure. Yeah, you're right. There is some overlap because writing is writing, but there's also a lot of difference. I feel like in many ways game writing is technical writing. You get pieces of creativity, you get the flavor text, the read aloud text. You still get that level of creativity in the world building, but you're essentially writing an instruction manual. So you have to think in a very different way. You certainly have to think in a nonlinear sort of way. Um, but where I think for me the starting point was common is I'm a notorious outliner anyway. When I'm working on even a short story, I'm outlining it first. So I think by really spending a lot of time in the planning phase, deciding what I want the game to do, what paths it might take, and when I look back at my earliest notes, and that's true whether for a novel or for this TTRPG, is like the scope is like outrageously huge, and I have to keep whittling away. I have to keep streamlining. I have to keep making decisions to say, does this make the game better or does it make it simply more complex? And in this case, because I wanted it to be accessible to new players and new DMs, it made some of those choices very easy. It was like, no, this is just going to be another thing that they trip over, or this is going to be another mental, some mental acrobatics that I'm requiring them to do. So really, and then again, I approached it the same way I would when I'm world building. I did a little bit of world building for Mezzo Earth, just because that was one of the sort of pseudo settings in Sir Larps a lot. but it really was, okay, where am I in the world? Where am I going to focus? Who are the players, or the influencing people in the area? What am I actually going to have them do? Why are they here? So a lot of the planning felt very similar to novel planning. And then it really, the hard part, the challenging part, the different part was, how am I going to organize this? Like, if you're writing a chronological story, that's not so much an issue. You might be wrestling with, well, who's my POV character, or do I jump over to this subplot or to this one? But this really is, what information does someone need right now? Where do I put that here? Or do I reference so they have to like flip open an appendix? It really became something of a logic puzzle, which I can be very left brained. So I actually kind of enjoyed that, and I kept coming back to, I haven't been DMing for very long. What do I have to rearrange when I'm making my notes, or what have been my stumbling blocks, and how can I remove those when I actually, kind of put the story out there. And another aspect that I think is really cool is, when you're writing traditional fiction, you have to commit to an idea. You have to commit that this is the way it's going to be, and come up with the most satisfying path. With TTRPGs, you have to come up with a lot of really cool hooks and ideas and paths, and realize the game is going to change based on who's running it, based on who's playing it, and build in a lot of freedom in that way. And again, finding that balance between too much freedom and not enough. But I think for someone who has a lot of ideas, it's really kind of cool, because an idea for a subplot, I can't put that in the novel, but I can put that on the rumor table. I can put that, just that one little nugget, and if the GM thinks it's really cool, they can run with it. So in some ways, it's a lot more freeing as a writer, because you can put a lot more ideas out there, and if nothing comes of it, it's not going to wreck the game. They just don't pursue it. They just choose not to incorporate it.
Yeah. So we got Lyra says lots of tweens at the library, at their library, took a first step into D&D versus LARPs a lot. So makes
Very
sense
cool.
to try to do something that was a little bit more user friendly, or newbie friendly,
Yeah.
since they're coming in from the novel. And then she asks a question about, how much does the Midwest inform your settings?
So, as someone who like was writing very much in-world traditional fantasy, it's kind of hard to work some of that stuff in. But as I was writing, the dream, if souls can sleep in the that trilogy, I kind of was able to put Milwaukee as a setting, and really kind of draw on my experiences there for one of the characters who was living there. And so then with Lost Tales Sir Larpsalot, I just decided pretty early on that, like, this is going to be a local story. It's, set in the city I live in. The kids are tromping around a woods that I grew up tromping around, and just screwing around as kids with nothing better to do. So I would say, very intentionally, for the Lost Tale of Sir Larpsalot, it definitely impacted that, because I wanted to if you want to step into someone else's shoes, you got to get in their mindset. So I had to really pull myself back to, well, what was important back then? What were my friendships and relationships like? How do kids talk to each other? So it really kind of served a dual purpose of, not only do I know the setting, not only is it fun to write about, things that other local readers might get a kick out of, but it just adds a little bit more authenticity, and it kind of forced me to step back into my childhood a little bit, and think about the people who I knew, and, well, what would they do if they got pulled into this world? They're not just going to suddenly start working as this well-oiled machine to overcome obstacles. No, they're gonna be yelling at each other quite a bit, and making a lot of mistakes, and giving each other crap, because that's what kids do. With the Curse of Ermagerd, again, being now in, a fantasy world, I don't have quite as many of those opportunities, but there's still time where I can think about, like, one of the NPCs who you can choose, get as a companion is River Eagle. Well, that's just an inverse of Eagle River, which is a city where I used to go as a kid for vacation and visit family up there. So there's just time, opportunities, the untamed North. There's a little bit of, like, some, the frozen tundra, Green Bay kind of, flavoring to it, but not necessarily anything that's like super identifiable, or necessarily breaking the immersion. So I like to usually play a bit more subtle, but with the novel, it was very much a chance to say, "Hey, I know this area. I've had this experience here. You know, this is what a teenager, if these teens were alive today doing this, what they would find and maybe how they would, go about things." So it was a lot of fun because as someone who traditionally writes very strange things that aren't necessarily always rooted in our world, um, it really gave me an excuse to play in my own backyard, figuratively speaking, and
Yeah,
kind of literally.
yeah. So Jeff has a question for you about one of your characters. In your mind, when Mac is in character, is her voice feminine or masculine?
Brutus is definitely a male Minotaur, so I think she probably goes kind of low and husky when she's Brutus. And yeah, Brutus was a really fun character to come up with, and I liked it for so many reasons. And one is like you're role playing, right? The easy thing would have been for Mac to play a female, so there's some gender balance within the party. But Mac doesn't want to play a female, and again, these are based off of real world experiences I have where various people I've come across, even just in passing conversations. I had a conversation where someone's like, "Oh, a friend of mine, she's playing like this really badass Minotaur," and or you know, my kids are playing with friends, and for the first time, like, um, one of the girls is like, "No, I'm gonna play this like badass male dwarf." It's like, yeah, that's totally what Mac would pick, and it's authentic and yeah, she plays Brutus like a dude because it's RP. You can be and do whatever you want.
So, I guess maybe going along with that a little bit, it kind of reference some of your own experiences playing D&D. How did those experiences that you've had playing, either maybe not just D&D, but fantasy role playing games, whether they be video games or whatever, how did those experiences kind of inform what you wanted to develop in your
Yeah,
module?
yeah. I think it's easy for writers to kind of just, and in some ways, you always start out this way. You want to produce the thing that you want to play. You write the thing you want to read. But I've been very fortunate to play a lot of different campaigns and with a lot of different groups, different DMs. I think that was a boon because you get exposed to a variety of play style. And you start to not only see what those reoccurring ingredients are in modules, but you really get to see firsthand what resonates with the players. So I think I went from the very beginning knowing like, yeah, there's people who are only playing D&D for the battles. Like there are people who that's what they do. Yeah, maybe they're the murder hobos. Maybe it's just, especially teen boys. Like that's the draw. But then there, are others who really want puzzles or really enjoy the social interactions, the speechcraft or diplomacy. So I made it a point for this game to really I saw those as kind of my three pillars that I wanted to focus in and give a balance to the point where there's a table in the beginning of the book where you see each of the player characters' strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, Brutus is going to be great at combat, but not necessarily at puzzle solving. So I think it really helps to acknowledge that there's going to be different interests that draw people, and then kind of point them to the character that's going to let them be the most successful in what they want to do, and build an adventure where, you're not going to have the minstrel king Elvish Presley just kind of scratching his head saying like, well, what do I do? Because like I'm a support character and there really isn't a whole lot for me to be doing, or like I could really be, I've got a silver tongue here. I could maybe talk our way into something, but there is an opportunity because everything's just going to be like battle after battle after battle. So I think for me, that was uh, that was a lot of the draw for my experiences was what do I see working at a table? What types of players do I see? And can I make a game that appeals to several different preferred play styles? And that way I feel like I end up with not just a game that I want to play and that's going to work for me, but hopefully, different people are going to get, they're going to like different things. This will be their favorite. Well, that'll be their favorite. And again, just trying to be very intentional about providing a little bit broader gaming experience. This isn't just going to be one long dungeon crawl. This isn't going to be a no violence campaign where we all just, talk things out. It's going to be a combination.
Yeah, and in pursuing that, you have a lot of things that you need to flesh out or develop. You've got this module has a lot of new spells, a lot of new monsters. I mean, even the characters. The characters aren't traditional D&D character classes. They're kind of almost their own stat blocks and might pull in abilities from several, almost like multi-classed characters in some cases.
Yeah.
In all of that, what was your favorite thing to design or develop from like maybe more of like a mechanical?
Yeah, it was a weird transition because here are live action role players with a very rules light approach, and now I'm enforcing rules and trying to, make it sort of a D&D 5th edition light kind of approach. So yeah, it did require some rethinking, and it would have probably been easier in some ways to just stop calling Sir Larpsalot Paragon and calling him a paladin. Um, but again, doing that, then all the complexity and wording that's inherent to that, I have to then grapple with it. So I probably took on a little bit more work than I needed to by coming up with these, first three levels of all these essentially new classes. And that was kind of fun. Again, it becomes this logic puzzle where you don't want suddenly Master Prospero to be able to cast Torchnado at level 1 and just take everybody out in one spell, but he has to get that eventually. So yeah, it was kind of a balancing of like, what are they learning when, what are they going to need when. um, and that is probably actually where I spent the most amount of time, because I had them starting at level 1. Then I'm like, but all the cool stuff usually happens later, so I'm actually going to have these characters start at level 2 because canonically they already would have been heroes for a while. And then play testing, and other things was like, actually, if you're playing with first time characters, you don't want them to be at level 3 complexity. It's gonna be a lot more intimidating. So then I had to roll them all back to level 1. So that was probably one of the bigger uh, challenges. The spells were a lot of fun too, though, because some of the spells and moves are really streamlining or a different interpretation of some of the stuff people are used to. Um, which, someone who's played fifth edition before, I think, can kind of see those, and just will have to look at the wording a little bit more closely. Like Brutus's fury is kind of like rage, but maybe there's some differences there. But at the same time, writing it in such a way that if I've never played before, this isn't going to be a head scratcher, and I'm never going to use the move because I don't understand it. But spells, yeah, spells were a lot of fun. In no small part because I really got to put in a lot of my puns that were fun in the book. Torchnado and Psych Clone, a psychic attack, and you know, Optimist, Epicdermis. Just, yeah, again, just trying to find, there's these words in a novel. What do they translate to in game? How do they work? Um, One of my favorite moves is Tomfoolery's ability. It's not really a spell; it's an ability just called Yeet, where if he's feeling threatened, he can throw himself 90 feet away from danger. No opportunity attacks on him. He curls up in a ball, gets advantage on all. He basically just is like, "See ya, I'm out." He just bails from battle for a turn and leaves the party to fend for themselves, which is very much in character for Tomfoolery. So it was really just trying to think of, in the novel, how these characters are played by their players, and getting all that flavor into the move sets, where it just feels natural. Like, you don't have to play Sir Larpsalot the way Lorenzo would play Sir Larpsalot, but he's built in a way that Lorenzo would have played him. So you can put your own spin on it, but the moves are aligned with his motivations, his combat style, his personality. So that was kind of a lot of fun. And really, one thing that I really enjoy in RPGs, whether it's a video game or a tabletop, is just the idea of factions, right? So you make decisions that are unpopular with some, but gain you favor with another. It's something I really wanted to include in the game from the very beginning. Of, you have three possible companions, and the decisions you make, who's in your party, what you say and do, is going to impact the likelihood of who you end up traveling with, which is going to determine the path that you go through this story. So that was another fun one, that I had all these ideas of, well, you could start with this faction and then switch to this one and then even get to the third one. And I ended up with this like horrible chart of like 27 paths. And I'm like, no one's going to want to try to like wrap their mind around this because I don't even want to write something that complex. So again, it was okay. Like, is that that balance of way too sandbox to all right, let's provide options, but then still kind of have some clearly established paths so the DM isn't scrambling to be like, okay, well now what do I do? Because they've just done something. I got to turn to with this weird section of a page again. It was all this puzzle that I had to kind of had to keep straight and make some decisions to always simplify, always streamline, always clarify was kind of my goal. And again, I'm not trying to take fifth edition in a whole new direction. I'm really trying to make it accessible. I'm trying to like what is the core of 5e? Like I'm not doing three quarters cover. Like that's not. I mean, if a DM wants to use it, they certainly can. But um, it really was more how do I take really fun, sometimes silly ideas and make it a game where it's fun and funny, but at the same time the players are taking it seriously. Like it can't just be a joke that you're laughing and there are no stakes. And for me that was the challenge of like I'm when people step into these characters and are playing it, like I don't want them to think, well, if I die, no big deal. It's a big laugh. It's like, no, you're still even as you're laughing, you're like, but I don't want this bad thing to happen to me. You still want to be immersed in the world, even if it's a funny world.
Well,
I hope I
very
answered
cool.
the question. I was
Yeah.
kind of rambling.
No, I think so. I think so. Um, so now that you've had this experience, do you have plans for, you mentioned the April Fool's joke, but like maybe now that you got that feedback from some people, maybe it isn't so much of a joke. What do you think? Are there other TTRPG products that you are thinking about based on your literary works?
I think there's a strong possibility I'll write more games. I don't think I'll write a game for the Renegade Chronicles. Part of that is because it is such a traditional fantasy setting. It I don't feel like I'd be saying really anything all that new. I think I'd have a lot of fun making it and sort of building out the settings, and I think I'd have a lot of fun doing it. But I think what really satisfies me as a creator is kind of trying new things and pushing boundaries and doing things I haven't done before, haven't seen before. So I don't think there's really an appeal there for me to do the Renegade Chronicles. Like it wouldn't, it would get lost in the noise, right? Like there's nothing I could, even if I did some very untraditional things, that one just isn't speaking to me. And I think of the Dreamscape novels, and uh, you know, Soul Sleep Cycle books, and I'm like, that'd be kind of cool because the Dreamscape is its own kind of fantasy setting. People are actually RPing there already in the novels. They're becoming new personas, but the Dreamscape by its nature is very much rules free, anything goes kind of thing. So it'd be really hard to kind of come up with a rule set for moves. I could do it, but again, um, I I don't know. I think it'd probably be more likely that I would either do another adventure with the LARP slot gang, but I don't know. I have an idea that I've been kind of kicking around a new setting. Again, like we have a lot of games that have elves and dwarves and humans. I keep coming back to, well, just because Tolkien did that, why are we still doing that? Like, almost a century or more later. Um, and I just find myself thinking, well, what if I came up with a world where there are no elves, dwarves, or humans, and they're all just sort of these unique. And so I've been playing around with that, and it may end up being a game, it may end up being a series of novels, could be both. I don't know. Um, I do know that at the moment, Curse of Ermagerd took a lot longer to do. I knew it was going to be hard. I knew it was going to be, challenging in certain ways and not take me the same amount of time, say, as a novel. Um, but you don't know what you don't know till you do it. And I think for me, I'm still at the point where, man, jumping into another one right away is a little intimidating. So I'm kind of letting things breathe. And I'm like, I'm just going to world build and not tell myself I'm doing it for a game. I'm just going to have fun on the creative side, and whatever it becomes, probably subconsciously realizing it'll probably be a game at some point. We'll see.
Yeah. And that's probably speaking more to like personal stuff or the stuff that the projects that you would be initiating, but you've also been delving into other mediums through some freelancing work that you've been particularly. I'm familiar with the things you've been doing with Goodman Games. I think you've gotten into some video game writing. Any upcoming projects that you're working on that you can talk about that you'd like to share about?
You know, yeah, Grimtooth's Old School Traps is probably the only one from Goodman Games I'm allowed to talk about at this point. I did have a module for them that I wrote for their fifth edition fantasy. Not sure when that's going to see the light of day, but that's kind of out there in the ether. Um, Goodman Games has another book that they haven't announced yet that they kind of already put feelers out for, and I've started doing some brainstorming and am getting excited about. I have some really kind of cool ideas there. I have a short story that's going to appear in a Dream Punk anthology later this year. But otherwise, I really am in between big projects, and it's really intentional, and it's not my natural state. I really like to be working on something, and working towards something. But I'm also, going to events selling my books in game, and I have my first con in January coming up where I'm actually going to run the intro to the game, which is intimidating for me, just because I haven't done it yet. Again, you don't know what you don't know, and I'm a planner, so that's taking up a lot of my time right now. So it really is just this, very like business side of things that I'm attending to. And then when I have pockets of time, I just go into pure world building and imagination, and it's just inventing entirely new species of sentient races and whatnot. So yeah, it's a weird space to be in. I keep telling myself like really what I'm coming up with probably isn't going to work well in fifth edition. So what is it? Where does that leave me? Am I going to learn a new one? Am I going to create my own rule system, which also is like extremely intimidating, but also very exciting prospect. So I don't know. Who knows? I'm living in this nebulous area creatively, projects wise, and I'm just not stressing about it. Just going to world build, and whatever that speaks to me to do with it, I'll do something with it, I guess.
Well, that's good that you've got that you get enjoyment out of that, and you've got a little bit of freedom maybe right now to
Yeah.
not feel like you have to do it for some end goal purpose, but just for the process of doing what you love
Yeah.
to do. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, what advice would you give to aspiring writers, whether they be those looking to enter into the literary world, whether they're looking to go into the TRPG world? Do you have any, just based on your experiences, advice for things you wished you would have known?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I like to preface it by saying that like no one I've never come across two writers whose paths have been the same. There really isn't a step one, do this, step two, this. Guaranteed step three, you are now a successful published writer. Like it just it doesn't exist. Everyone's gonna have, results vary. And so I think for me, the biggest advice I would give, and this is something that I've kind of seen along the way, and maybe it even flies into the face of, contrary to what other people are saying who like are more like do your market research and do. For me, it's like I think it really is do what you would do anyway. I think your passion is going to be a really powerful ingredient into anything you do. And I don't know, I don't care if it's Critical Role or Dungeons of Drakkenheim or any of those other streams. A lot of these things where now Kickstarters get fulfilled in get met in a matter of minutes. It started out as a really low budget, just some friends getting together playing a game. It's hey, I'm writing this homebrew and I'm running it for people and they really seem to enjoy it. Maybe I'll get some art, slap a cover on it and try to get it out and find other players. And so I really think if you start from a place where this is something that I enjoy, um, I think that's an excellent starting point. Um, it really lets you, yeah, get to a point where even if no one is into it, you still end up with something you love. You still end up something you're proud of. You still have the memories of other people who reading it, and so that for me has kind of been something I learned along the way. I think other things to keep in mind are you have to put yourself out there. You have to say yes, no than more. It's that sort of no gig too small mentality. Like you may have a very clear idea. Well, this is the path I want to take. Be willing to take detours, try things. You never know what connection is going to lead to the next one. That I've had some really fun, pleasant surprises of like, wow, I thought this was just going to be a one-off interview with a guy whose website I never heard of. Now I'm in two Dreampunk anthologies. Like you don't know. And I guess lastly, I would say don't underestimate the importance of luck. Like you can do everything right, you can keep trying and keep hitting a wall. It's easy to quit. Sometimes you have to take a break for sanity purposes. That I get it, but um, just realize that like being in the right place at the right time, knowing someone, having an in is gonna, you can't quantify that. You can't necessarily plan for it. Life ain't fair, so you really just have to kind of accept the punches. And something I'm not always good at is celebrating the successes. I'm more of a forward thinker onto the next. So if I'm not reaching that next, I sometimes forget about all my other accomplishments, and it's easy to lose sight of, well, no, like take a break here. Just because this didn't happen doesn't mean, all these other things don't count. So I guess maybe that's a glimpse into my psychology personally, but just even from a professional standpoint, what I'm seeing, when I run into other people who are doing this, it's kind of like, yeah, you're not going to get noticed if you don't put your hand up. You're not going to get discovered if you don't put something out there to discover. That's true with TTRPGs. It's true with novels. It seems even more true with video games. It's like the advice I hear for that is like, you got to make your own games. Like you can't just be waiting around for someone to give you a chance. Like you got to stumble through. You got to find other people who are also at the same stage you are and are willing to like experiment and try to put something, anything out there. Long gone are the days of people just out there looking for talent and snatching you up because you're brilliant. There's so many of us. There's so many creative people who have the same dream or similar dreams, and you just have to climb and scrabble and elbow and get noticed any way you can.
Yeah, I like that the element of luck. I've often with working with like college students, you got to create your own luck and just
Yeah.
following the things that you just talked about. There are so many people, and it's all about relationships. Like there's always gonna be like a million people like equally as talented as you, but like, do they know anything about you, right? Like, so putting
Right.
yourself out there, volunteering, letting people get to know your story and your stories that you're writing. I think that's
The
all
world
very
got
good.
got really small, right? Like it's everyone can talk to anyone, and so it's not even these little pockets. It's you're kind of competing with every other human being on the planet at this point. And yeah, you're right. And yes, you make your own luck because you find those opportunities and you work hard. And to me, the one of the biggest pitfalls is like comparing yourself to others and where they are on their path, because you just don't know what they fought to get there. You don't know if they're about to hit a wall. You just don't know, and it's because it's not a you know connect the dots kind of thing to create the same picture for everyone. It can be very discouraging. I mean, you hear that with anything with social media. Everyone's just posting their successes and look at me, I did this. Look at me, I did that. And you can get a very distorted view of how how much they had to struggle to even get that one thing to post about. So yeah, it's in some ways it's nice to put blinders on and again just say like, well, what do I want to do? What game would I want to play? I'm gonna do it. If no one is excited about my idea now, like I'm gonna run with it and put it out there anyway because I believe in what I do. Which again is the flip side of people who say no, do target market research and build a product that you know is going to have a built-in audience. I think there are very business savvy creatives who can and in fact do that, but um, I find there to be a happy medium. Like I'm not going to put something out there if I don't think anyone's going to else enjoy it except me. Then it would just be a hobby, and I would just write it and not share it. But at the same time, I can't only write to market. I can't just say I'm going to write. Those things don't fuel my soul. Now, if someone is going to pay me and it's going to get me a byline, and I'm going to get, you know, experience out of writing something that maybe I wouldn't have come up with on my own, but I'm being assigned it. That's a different story. That's a different motivation. Um, but again, then you filter in your own passion projects in between.
Well, very cool. Let's segue into some fun questions. Um, so first we're gonna go through some favorites, I think. So, what is your favorite D&D module that you've played or read?
Sure. So I confess I'm a relative newcomer. I've only been playing maybe for the past 5 years. So fifth edition is what I have the most experience with, other than some DCC or other things that you've run on the channel where I've been able to do some one shots and had fun there. Um, I've enjoyed every campaign I've played, um, but from both a player perspective and a world building perspective, I have to say that Curse of Strahd ranks very high. Um, it's about as sandbox of a game as I've seen Wizards of the Coast like put out there. And I really appreciate some of the variables that it accommodates. Like, the party's fated companion is based off of like a dice roll, like it's there a card being drawn, and letting players choose which quests they want to pursue when they want to pursue it, or simply not pursue it, and the world goes on, and there are consequences one way or another. I think that is for me like it really checked a lot of boxes for me of like what I enjoy. um, and I think Rime of the Frost Maiden tries to do some of that. I felt like maybe they tried to make another adventure, but it's almost too open world for my preference. And I just think even as a DM, like keeping track of 10 towns, which is 10 towns, is a lot more daunting than maybe 3 villages in a campaign. So that one I thought I would really enjoy, and I read through it, and I kept thinking I'm going to run this, and I just could not get excited about it. I'm like, I don't think I would like to run this. I don't. There are certain aspects I think are cool, but it just didn't pull me in. So I have to say Curse of Strahd, and of course it is a very consistent tone and has some fun themes in there. So to date, that is my favorite. But it's so hard to pick because yes, the story is important, but who's DMing it, who your other players are, like those are almost as important, if not more important. Like I think I could play a really horribly written game, but if I had a fun DM and players who are all kind of on the same page, like I think that could more than make up for it.
Solid choice. So Percy had asked this earlier as well. Who is your favorite author?
Oh man, you can't ask an author whose favorite author is. That's um I will go back to say like there are some ones that rise to the top. Like as far as I'm concerned, Neil Gaiman can do no wrong. Like I feel like if there was a spell where I could just like switch lives with somebody, or like or repeat career path that another author has taken, like I'm like, yes, his can I be that guy? Um and a big part because he's one of those people that isn't just writing one thing over and over again, or even writing one medium over and over again. His works are now in graphic novels, children's books, and like he's proving that you can be a diverse writer and still find success. So I'd say he's way up there. I'm still a big fan of Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, just because they kind of got me into all this with their Dragonlance novels. I loved R.A. Salvatore's Demon War saga, though I confess I burnt out on his Drizzt books. Like the Undying Hero just like doesn't do it for me. Like I kill off characters. I think you need to have a measure of peril, otherwise there's not a lot of suspense. But yeah, Demon Wars by Salvatore. The guy can write an action scene like nobody else. So kudos to him. And thinking more broadly outside genre, I've always been fond of William Faulkner, and I'm pretty sure Alexander Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo is one of the best books ever written. So yeah, like just again complexity, messing with the reader. Faulkner, like he writes novels like puzzles, and I dig it. And yeah, Count of Monte Cristo, it's like, man, buckle up and just get pulled into a world of many layers. Um, and yeah, those are the ones that come to mind as far as authors and their books.
All right. This is like the most important question. But you've probably been thinking a lot about D&D monsters with some of the work you've been doing with Goodman Games. So what is your favorite D&D monster?
Man, I really struggle with the word favorite. I'm not the kind of guy that can do that, but I will say when I think about this and the monsters, when I think of D&D, I think the logical thing that people think of for fantasy, even in general, is dragons. And dragons, I never much cared for them. They don't really do it for me. I think it's maybe because they're overused. I just don't feel like there's a lot of new material to mine from them or something. So like So it's definitely not dragons. I need a new twist on those to really make me care about dragons. So then I think, okay, well, what else when you think about D&D? And I kind of think in the top slots are the Illithids. I think they're iconic in their own way. They're alien yet eminently understandable because once you understand their motivations, their social structure, they feel like they could be an actual species that exist in the world, which is terrifying. Which is another reason why they're very cool is because they're terrifying. And I feel like it's maybe one of the early quote unquote original ideas D&D had. It's not just another Tolkien adaptation where or other, we're just going to pluck these things from other mythologies. I feel like this was something, even if it was inspired by another thing, it sort of became its own thing within D&D. So I definitely feel like if you just want a baddie that you can go in swinging at and not feel too guilty and realize that these things are going to be a problem whenever you encounter them, like I feel like the Mind Flayer is pretty epic.
Outside of, well, I don't know. Are you playing any Baldur's Gate 3?
Not yet. It just
Oh,
I'm a
I'll give you an
console
elephant
guy.
fix.
Yeah, I know. I did see that there Illithids, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. No, I'm a console guy, and it now is available. But I also have a birthday coming up, and I think it's on my list, so I can't just go out and buy it for myself. But that definitely is on my to play list for sure. I'm very excited about that game.
Lyra, oh, I like this question from Lyra. What one prop from any movie set would you take?
Oh my gosh, that's an amazing question. Um, Man, one of the first things that popped in my mind is like I'd really love a suit of Iron Man armor. Like
Yeah,
that would be pretty sweet to just have in one's house. Just like yeah, there's the Mark III. Just hanging out there. Um,
my
man,
wife
that
works at the public museum here in Oshkosh, and not so long ago they had an exhibit that was like movie props, and they had some like pretty prominent ones. Like they had like Indiana Jones, like his whole outfit and like the whip and everything, and I think they had some
mm,
Star Wars stuff. I don't know if they had like one of the lightsaber hilts.
yeah, man, that is a good question. I think I couldn't go wrong with a suit of Iron Man armor. I think that might be my answer. I'm thinking of like other fantasy like movies and things I enjoy, and like I could see, but I could go out and buy like a replica of you know, Grist's swords or Glamdring from Lord of the Rings. Like you can almost get like replicas of some of that stuff, but it'd be a lot harder to get an Iron Man suit. So I'm gonna stick with my Iron Man suit answer.
It's good. Pee-wee's bicycle, yeah, that'd be solid. I'd take that.
Drop it off at the basement of the Alamo just to punk the Alamo a little bit.
So outside of writing and role playing games and video games, what are some hobbies or passions that
You know, I really feel like I check all the nerd boxes. I mean, yes, playing video games, that's something that I do quite a bit. It's something my wife and I do together. So it definitely, watching sci-fi and fantasy shows and movies. Um, I do enjoy reading comic books. So I feel like, yeah, I'm probably a cliche in some of those ways. And then I think like, yeah, we travel. But I think for me, it's like I like if I have spare time and it's not like I'm just gonna like decompress or spend time with family or something, and it's like, all right, what are you gonna do now? You have some time to yourself. It's like I'm gonna create. I'm gonna jump back at in front of my laptop and start working on the next thing because that's kind of what fuels me. So I don't really think there's a whole lot else. Not enough other hours in the day to come up. I joked like, oh, it'd be kind of fun to learn banjo, or it'd be kind of fun to, do some community theater stuff. It's like I know my limitations. Like I can't. There really isn't. If I'm gonna continue my side hustle and keep creating new things, I can't consume or create in other ways. Like I have to have some measure of focus. So
Well, tell us a little bit about where can we find out more about your works, and of course, get a copy of Curse of Ermagerd.
sure. So my website's probably the best place to get a comprehensive look at everything I've done. that has all my novels. It has this game. I did a web comic for a year that you can read on there. So davidmichaelwilliams.com with hyphens, so david-michael-williams.com. Pretty much has anything and everything and more that you'd ever want to know about me creatively. And then there are links to buy the game on that website, or you can go directly to DriveThruRPG, drivethroughrpg.com, and get the hardcover. There's also a digital edition, or you can get both. I believe I have it set up where if you do get the hardcover now, you can automatically get the digital, and that'll have downloads for like the maps and other things. Because I hate it when people make you buy the same thing twice just to get it in different. Like no, like just get them both. If you're a I'm a hard copy person, so I
Yeah.
always like to have the book for my shelf, but I don't necessarily want to penalize someone who then like, well, it'd be really kind of cool to have these maps so I don't have to photocopy them. No, you can download the PDFs. So I wonder if you have any questions. I'm very responsive on social media. I have a contact form on my website. I love to hear from people. I try to pop in on the 20 Sides Discord channel here and there, although I'm not always great at it. I kind of go in fits and starts. But yeah, I love talking about all things geeky. So love to hear from you.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, David. For those of you watching, I saw some of our players for the game are here as well. We're going to be doing a playthrough, the first chapter of Curse of Ermagerd here on Friday, September 22nd, and that'll be starting at 8 p.m. So just keep on top of the schedule that I post for next week on that. Yeah, but that'll do it for us today. Thanks so much for joining us. I think as we close out here, we'll pass a raid over. I think I saw Sir doing, they do um, a little bit of a Saturday morning kind of D&D talk show kind of thing. So it'll be very similar format to this. So let's go see what they are chatting about. So thanks everybody. Join
Thanks
the
for having
raid,
me.
and we will see you guys soon. And here we go.